Hi, welcome to Ms. Cooper's art class. Today I'm going to be showing you how I would approach stippling some wrinkled fabric for a drawing. I'll show it to you start to finish, and I'm going to start with the reference photos. This is the photo I ultimately chose as my reference. I chose it because it is very shiny. I used some shiny kind of satiny pants that I had that had dark shadows and bright highlights. I'm going to show you, in contrast, using something like this might not be as exciting as a reference photo because you don't get those bright highlights. This was a gray hoodie. I thought it would look cool, and it really didn't. Another thing I tried was this delightful velvety fabric. It wrinkled really well, and it was very shiny, but I found that it looked rather dusty when I photographed it and changed it to black and white, so I stuck with this one. I would recommend making your photo black and white as well so that you can see what you're doing. In this video, I'm going to start with the shadowy areas and do a dark to light approach, although you could do this however you wanted to. I found doing the shadows, like these little red doodles, and then kind of highlighting out some of the highlights, blocking out medium areas was helpful, and then I connected it all together at the end. So starting with the shadows, let's take a look at what that looks like. With my reference photo nearby and my Micron pens in hand, I already had it out and I was ready to go. I'm using 05, 03, and 01 Micron pens for this video. Towards the end, I started using a .005 because I found that that was helpful for blending and for some of the smaller details. At the beginning, it's deeply satisfying just to block out some of those wrinkled areas. I already had them in pencil, and I drew them out with a solid line. I kept it light enough that I could erase later, and then I started putting in the shadows. You'll see some dashed lines in pencils. Those are to block out the medium areas, and we will take a look at those later. What you'll notice is that I'm not going as deep and dark as possible for all of the shadows because a lot of these shadows aren't truly black. They're just a very, very dark gray. So I still blocked them out very dark. They look black from far away, but it makes a big difference. It makes it look less like a cartoon if you stick with a very dark gray instead of a black. You'll notice some of the shadows vary a bit. Some of them are much darker gray than others. What you'll also notice here is I'm really not blending these in because that is going to happen in the next step. Now you can see I'm still using my 03 if you can keep up with the speed of the video, that is. But I do switch a little bit between the 05. I mostly use that for the shadows just to move really quickly. And then for these medium areas, you can see I'm blocking them in using the 03, and I also use the 01 for a lot of the shadows. I found that varying it up helped, and as you get comfortable using your different tools, you will find what works for you. Because I was in a bit of a hurry, the 03 was good. Sometimes I feel like I clump some of my dots a little too close together with this one, and so what I did was I went back in with my 01 and I smoothed it out a little bit more. And then for some of the more kind of light areas or some of the details that change quickly, some of the more precise areas, I went in and used the 05 to create some really small dots between my dots to smooth everything out. So it looked less like a drawing and more like a photorealistic rendering of some fabric. You can see here I am blocking out those medium areas now, but even in those medium areas, like the shadows, there is a lot of variation, and that's important to pay attention to so that your fabric doesn't look too uniform. Unless you have the perfect lighting and the perfect fabric, you are going to notice that in your medium areas, there's a big range of what medium can mean. So you still have to pay attention, but by chunking it out this way and breaking it into pieces, I do find it easier to do shadows, then midtones, and then your highlights. We'll save those highlights for the end. Now, I'm not really a believer in telling you you have to do everything a certain way. If it is easier for you to start with the medium areas and then deepen some of the shadows, you can go for it. I'm not going to stop you. For me, I just find it easier to start with those pencil areas. You can see that as I go, I am correcting myself and kind of smoothing things out, but what I'm not smoothing here are the edges to those medium areas. The reason why I'm not smoothing the edges quite yet is because it helps me understand the overall shape of the fabric and how it ripples through space. And I think it helps me just not get too caught up in all of the different shades of gray. Having these different categories is helpful, and the beautiful part about stippling is that you can always smooth it by adding more dots. If I did this with pencil, colored pencil, ballpoint pen, and I had these hard edges in there, because of the nature of those materials, it would be much harder to go back in and smooth them because they put physical dents and grooves in the paper. It would be a little hard to recover from that because we would see kind of the history of those dents and grooves in the paper. But the beautiful thing about stippling is it is fairly low pressure on the paper, and it is pretty easy, I think, compared to other materials to smooth out. So that's why I'm leaving those hard edges, because it's very easy to smooth out later. You can see I am blending some of those shadows into some of the medium areas as I go. But what I found when I was doing this fabric was that the shadows didn't really blend in that much to the medium areas. I thought that I would have to blend it more. I was really tempted to blend it a lot and have this very kind of long gradient from the dark areas to the medium areas. And what I found was the wrinkles were pretty deep and pretty precise. I didn't need to do a lot of blending on this step. So that was a surprise, and it was a good reminder for me and hopefully for anybody else watching that it is so important to pay attention to your reference photo and do exactly what's happening in that reference photo. It's very tempting to just kind of let the pen do its thing, and of course you can do that if you want to, but if you're going for realism, do pay attention to that photo because it will reveal some surprising things. Even within my medium areas, I noticed some highlights and some shadows that were unexpected or that I hadn't noticed, but because I was spending a lot of time with my reference photo, I caught some really interesting details. Speaking of time, as a matter of curiosity, if you're wondering about how long this entire video took, I have just under 5 hours of footage, but I would say this took somewhere around 6 to 6.5 hours to do. You'll notice I occasionally cut away, and that's because I would have to lean in really close to do some of the dots or some of the precise areas, and I would have hit my head on my camera stand, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to get very, very close and have my nose almost touching the paper so I could be extra super duper precise. What you will notice me doing now is those highlights. Now those highlights are not just white, a lot of those highlights are actually a very, very light gray. So what I did was I used mostly my 005, again, not O5, but 005. I mostly used that one to add a little bit of gray to some of my lightest areas. Now, some of the areas I did leave white because they were extremely bright and we were going for some really high contrast. That's why I picked the fabric. But the 005 was good for building in some of those very light gray areas, and it was good for doing some gentle blending. Now, like I discovered between the shadows and the highlights, not everything blends that much. There are some rather sharp edges in this fabric, especially in that kind of pointed wrinkle that you'll notice in the corner. But for the most part, fairly blended, not super blended. It's one of those times when, once again, it is very important to look at your reference photo and see what your fabric is doing, especially because you might have something different from mine. One thing I was paying attention to is the kind of steady rippling of some of those areas. You can see there's a lot of straight lines in here, and then I had to pay extra special attention to the kind of more pointed areas like the one I'm working near right now. There were some unexpected highlights, some unexpected shadows, and so I just paid close attention as I blended it out. You use whatever pen sizes work for you, of course, but for me, I did find that some of the smaller ones were very useful for some of the blending and for adding some of those extra dots in there. And I also found this to be the fastest part of the process because you cover a lot of ground very quickly with very few dots. So towards the end, this got much, much faster. I did kind of hop around. I ignored the left side of the drawing for a little while and I came back to it, but I realized there wasn't much happening. So ultimately I did cut off some of the paper because I just didn't care about that part as much. And I'm doing this drawing really just for me and for you, especially because this has been a requested video. But I don't think you were looking to watch me draw flat expanses of fabric. So I do cut off a little bit at the end because I don't think it was necessary. I don't think it was needed. This area I'm stippling is a delightful example of all those different shades of gray that you can find in those midtones, so it's still well worth doing, and I'm glad I went and did it, but I don't think I needed to do the entire rest of the fabric. Anyway, this is something that I hope you'll try. You can translate some of these ideas to other materials, but I do think this technique that I did especially leaving some of the hard edges on some of the midtones works best with stippling. And hopefully this is something you'll try. I love it if you send me links to your work or pictures. I love to see what you do. Anyway, here is a close-up look at the finished product, and then a little farther, and then I'll bring the camera in just a little closer so you can see the quality of the dots and what those look like and how this went. If you have any questions, comments, any thoughts, any video ideas, please let me know below. But thank you, as always, for watching my video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Please subscribe if you are interested in more, and check out my stippling playlist if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching.